Welcome to episode 153 of the Daniel Yoris podcast with today's guest, Bryan Krahn. Let's go. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Joined here today by Bryan Krahn. Bryan, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you in a tank top in the middle of January in Winnipeg.
Sorry, wait, man. I'm Canadian, man. This is like, I'm built for this. So,
and you live in real Canada, not like me in Toronto, where we get winter and it's like 2 centimeters of snow and we complain about it.
Yeah, man. I'm in the Bald Prairie, so yeah, it's actually it's not too bad today. I think it's minus 20, so that's why that's why the tarp's off and the So
you almost have to put socks on though.
That's well, 4 months till spring, man. 4 months till spring.
4 months till spring. Do you enjoy the winter at all? Do you do any like winter activities that help you to actually enjoy it?
No. My hockey days are those were over a long time ago, and I should say though, like a minus 10 kind of winter day, that's quite nice. I'll go out and I'll walk and stuff. But in terms of like playing sports or skiing and stuff, no, not really.
Yeah, fair enough. I only started snowboarding last year.
Yeah.
Purely as a way to like, hey, I hate the winter. Like I got to have something to look forward to here. So like now when it snows, I can at least say, hey, all right, I got to shovel the driveway, but I can go snowboarding. So there's at least that payoff there.
Yeah. No. Well, I'm in the prairie now too, man. If I want,
yes, you get none of that.
Not a lot of mountains around here.
That's right. In looking into some things for this episode, I noticed one thing that really caught my eye in your Twitter bio. And I'm sure that this is slightly satirical, but also kind of a good launching off point. And in your Twitter bio, you write, "You were jacked before it was cool." What does that mean?
Fuck, I don't know. I don't know. Well, I don't know. What does it mean? I guess I should have said a jack before social media. That I can say. Well, jacked in quotations.
You are way more jacked than most people, and you're extremely humble.
Yeah, well, something's funny. Like when I look at, I've been working out because I'm 50, so I've been working out since I was 15, and probably pretty religious. Yeah, like even by then, 14, 15. So 35 years. If I would have put the time that I put into this nonsense, if I would have put it into anything else, like I don't know, any other venture, I'd be set. Probably financially, probably relationships, probably, I probably have, I don't know, probably have a small empire somewhere. Instead, what I got is that I'm in a tank top in January. Choices, kids, choices. Yeah.
A small fitness empire, to at least.
Oh, yeah. And a couple of shoes.
Yeah. That's
all you got.
Yeah. It is interesting, though, how many people, like, really, it's very interesting to me how many people are now. It seems that the gym is becoming more mainstream, and I'm not sure if this is just an influx of talking about it on social media or in the real world, and you might have a better perspective on that because you've been doing this pre-social media. Like, do you think that there are more people involved in fitness now, or is there just more noise about it online?
It's just way more noise, more noise. And that's actually a good question. I mean, it's... Because when pumping iron, the great pumping iron, like that's when working out was still like a culty kind of activity. So when I think back, when I was in high school, and that's already a few years after pumping iron, it was already mainstream. I mean, so I'd go to gyms and they'd be busy, and obviously like 80s movies, everyone was muscular. It was already a thing. The fitness boom was the early 80s. So if I started in the late 80s, it was already a thing. But it just, you didn't hear about it constantly because you weren't always on your effing phone getting inundated with the same cheesy slogans and, thank God for the memes. At least the memes are entertaining.
The meme games are strong right now. Yeah. I think on that note, though, there's a lot of, like, in the 10 years that I've been, really in fitness and really paying attention and looking into things and whatnot, I've already seen things start to resurface and come back. And I'm sure you've seen this several times over by now. Like the big one right now is fasting. I remember when I was, 10 years ago, fasting was a thing, and then it kind of just like went out of flavor. And now all of a sudden everyone's like, "Oh my God, intermittent fasting. Have you heard of it?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, so is everyone. What are you talking about here? Like, what are we doing?" Like, but that must be almost annoying to you to hear these things come back and people think it's the cat's meow every time.
Oh, I wouldn't say it's annoying, but it is funny. And And I remember Dave Tate told me years ago, he's like, everything in this industry is cyclical. And, and the way he was referring to it, like low volume training and then will be popular. Then a few years later, high volume training will be popular, and low carb diets will be popular. And a few years later, it'll be high carb, low fat diets. Like everything goes in the cycle. Like I'm in at least my third rotation of the low carb, high carb. Because when I got into working out in the 80s, it was high carb, low fat, the 80s diet, as everyone always talked about. And then when I kind of got a little more serious, that's when low carb, and high fat, the anabolic diet, the body opus diet, that's when that was popular. So I had my first kind of that was my first time I had that thing happen in your head where you're like, everything I thought was wrong. Everything I've been doing was wrong. I was following this high carb diet, but now I'm reading these books and listening, hearing from these experts, I should be following a low carb, higher fat diet, and jumping into that rabbit hole and spending years at it, only to come out on the other side and see that, like high carb, higher carb, and, and seeing it that it is in fact a cycle. That's when you get true wisdom at this. Is you're like, wow, there's it's all variations of the same thing. And so now, it's gone around and around, and I do think it's funny, but I respect, because everyone's on this journey, so everyone has to go through that. They have to go through this, this phase where they're just learning about things, and it sounds like the greatest thing ever, and they don't have that experience yet to say, oh yeah, I remember this fad, and then have the additional wisdom to be like, what, it all really just boils down to calories. That's kind of like a little further down the road, but it's, hey man, it's the industry. It's afforded me to have a career in it, so I can't shit on it too hard. So
yeah, there you go. I think that part of it is, like you said, due to the inexperience and the inexperience in other maybe approaches, especially nutrition wise, where people seem to think that they've tried everything, and they haven't really tried everything, because if they did, they would have found something that worked, and then they find one thing that works for them. It's kind of like when you say, oh, well, when you lose something, it's always in the last place you would look. Well, of course it is, because then you stop looking for it, right? Yeah. But then, so they find this nutrition approach that's like, oh my God, this worked for me. It must work for everyone else. But they maybe don't have the experience to say like, hey, this actually doesn't work for everyone else, because through all of these stages of nutrition, I'm sure that you yourself, and maybe through clients and through others, have seen results using all of the different styles of eating or training and whatever. There's value to be had in all of them, and that people can get results doing all the things. There's not just a one size fits all that universally works for everyone.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember my very first actual training job I wasn't able to do personal training yet at this big box gym, but I was doing showing people around the machines. And I don't know how old I was, maybe 21. And my boss at the time, and he's like, look, I was peppering with questions about, what does this work better than this? This work better than that? Like all these things. And he's like, he's a pretty seasoned guy. And he was like, look, everything can work, and when he said that, I was like, oh, that basically, I thought he's telling me to piss off. He doesn't want to talk anymore. But I realized he's right. Like everything can work if you buy in and you're consistent with it. And then the caveat is, and you hit the basic physiological benchmarks, whether it's in training or in fat loss or whatever. You hit the basic, whether it's a calorie deficit or a progressive overload or whatever. As long as you're hitting those, anything can work, So it's, when you embrace that, all of a sudden it's like, kind of, it's liberating, and you can try all these different things, but nobody wants to hear that, at least not for a very long time. They want to be convinced that what they're doing is special and has some inherent kind of like thing that makes it superior to the other thing. And really now, like when I work with people, it's just whatever they like to do just naturally, without, especially with diet, like whatever they like to, foods they naturally like to eat, that's the best diet for them. Then we just make sure we hit these physiological benchmarks to get them to where they want to be.
100% agree. I think the only maybe caveat to that is people who are professional athletes or like physique competitors or bodybuilder competitors. It's like, hey, you don't get to do what you like. You get to do what works, because this is, your job, and you said you wanted to do this. But for 99% of everyone else, it's like, okay, you like to eat low carb. Well, well, okay, let's roll with that, because I'm not going to force you to do something you don't like. You're already having trouble sticking with this. I'm not going to make this process miserable. Like, again, you're not trying to step on stage. You're just trying to like lose 10 pounds and feel better when you go to work. That's all.
Exactly. It's like when everyone gets that new client who's like, usually it's a woman, and she'll say, oh, I hate breakfast. I never eat breakfast. I hate breakfast. Well, not too terribly long ago, we'd still be like, well, you got to change that. You got to start eating breakfast. It's your most important meal of the day, and, then all of a sudden, we understand that meal frequency and patterning is not that important. So entirely up to the person's natural rhythm, and then all of a sudden, it just kind of changes the game. So.
But not that fun to hear. Not that fun to hear that there's not a secret answer.
There's no, wish there was. Well, there's secrets, but they're, that's, drugs solves a lot of problems, but that's a bodybuilding thing more than anything. But even then, there's extreme consistency in those physiques. There's extreme of doing all the really important things right, for years. And then, the illegal stuff is like the icing on the cake.
Right. Now, this is actually something that I wanted to talk about, not because it's a huge thing that, people who listen are really interested in per se, but it seems like it's become more prevalent on social media. And that seems like I initially thought like, hey, we should legalize this stuff, let people talk about it, let the education get out there. And my mistake was like, not that I control any of this, but like then that also allows like idiots to just get out there and promote it and talk about it incorrectly. And this is where abuse and misuse happens. And it seems to be like more people are talking about it a little bit too freely. Do you think that is correct?
100%. Like it's, I'm from a bodybuilding background, and on the one hand, I think it's really, really cool that, that I can hop in, I can listen to a podcast with, two experts, not just experts, but like professional bodybuilders talking about what they did, like the drugs they took in their contest prep or whatever, like just the nitty gritty that frankly, back in the day when I was trying to learn all that stuff, I would be paying thousands of dollars in private consults and just would never even, you'd have to go to such great lengths to get that information. Mm-hmm. Like, especially with steroids, like if you were, kids are always, teenagers are obsessed with steroids. So like, but if they wanted that information when I was a teenager, there was no books, and certainly there's no books on steroids. I mean, there's no internet, and so you'd have to befriend the biggest guy in the gym, and 99 times out of 100, he's not dumb. He's a teenager asks about steroids. He's going to tell you to go fuck yourself and try to scare you away because he just doesn't want the hassle. Now fast forward to today. If I want to learn that information, it's everywhere, and I do think on the one hand, it's kind of good that there's less secrets now, and we're realizing, there is really nothing magical about any of that. It's the first thing that, especially young people, it's the first thing they talk about. Like, it's like when I get the rare time I get a training question at the gym, it's usually it's about that rather than, what exercise can I do for this or a diet question. Wow. And I'm just going on to see on social media, there's so much content dedicated to that. I just like to see more dedicated to, I shouldn't say there is a ton dedicated to training. I shouldn't say that. It just seems to be overshadowed by all this drug talk.
It seems to me like it's not mixed very well. Like I appreciate the education and stuff about drugs and performance enhancing things, and it's great. It's fun to learn about. I personally don't use it, but obviously nothing against it. Yeah. But and I think this is just the nature of social media, that there's not enough attention span. So if I'm going to make a post that's going to say, hey, here's like the cycle that I use, here are the things that I use, and also eat clean all the time, and I train hard, and I like do all the things, that's boring. If you just talk about, hey, here's a cycle that I use, it's 6 seconds long, flip to the next thing, then that will get views, and that's what gets promoted. But talking about the whole picture just like gets lost in the sea of content.
Well, if you talk to any really good bodybuilder who's a little bit older, anyone with like a really exceptional physique and more than a dozen brain cells, but like especially one who's a little bit older, they'll all say the same thing. They'll all say, if they're like talking to a young person, they'll be like, but you got to max out naturally first, and people either they don't hear that part, or they just refuse to that's part of being young, I guess. They just want to fast forward everything, they want to skip that part and so that's my one thing about all this information being out there is that just kids just think they can skip all the steps that you're supposed to go through before you kind of graduate to that. And that's one of the worst mistakes you can make is to jump on steroids when you're, when you still have way, way more development to go just naturally. I mean, you're just cheating yourself.
Yeah, and you're just missing out on some of the fun. Like I remember how fast and how easy it was to make progress. Like when I first started training, I was like gaining weight and gaining strength like crazy. Like, you walk in the gym and take 3 deep breaths and gain muscle somehow. Yeah. And now it's like, it's I'm not very old, so it's not that slow, but like it's not as much as when I was, 17, 16 in the gym for the first time. And to think that people have like maxed out, almost no one has maxed out their genetic potential.
Oh, no. Well, the ones that have, they've got a lot of bodybuilding trophies,
Yeah, exactly.
Just no one. I can count them on one hand, frankly, the people I know who've legit maxed out their potential. I mean, you can max out in other ways. You can max out, you can just age out. Like you get too old, you're just not, body just doesn't work as good anymore. I can speak to that, but it's just, like the number of people who've actually maxed out their genetic potential is a pretty short list.
Yeah. If you're not stepping on stage, then almost certainly you haven't maxed it out. If you're 17 years old in a regular big box gym going up to big guys asking them about stuff, like not you.
Yeah, I do find whenever even someone in their late 20s, I mean, man, that's just too young. It's too young. Just hold off.
What do you think are some considerations? Like what would be some good signs aside from maybe maxing out your genetic potential where someone should really start thinking about performance enhancing drugs for themselves?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's what do they want out of their training? Like what do they, if you're just training to be the best you can be and to be strong and to be healthy and to look good, like you just don't need it. Like you just, it's just not, there's always, especially on the diet end, man, there's so much that can be, and there's so much that can be improved on the diet end. And when people, so many guys will hop on before they have figured out the diet part. And figure out the diet part it's a bit of a trick thing to say. It's not knowing what to eat. That's easy. I can tell you that in 5 minutes. It's knowing what to eat and actually fucking doing it consistently for years. When you eat the way you should be eating and the amount you should be eating, and that's where meal frequency actually does matter. If you're eating consistently every day, day in, day out for years, and includes holidays, includes summer, it includes, day in, day out. That's what figuring out the diet means. It's not, this is the magic number of macros. None of that. That's just day one. Now do that for 1,000 days. Now you have figured out the diet. And so if you've figured out the diet part and you're not making gains and you're in your late 20s, okay, now we'll look at your training. But like those are the things that you have to exhaust before the drugs really should become an option.
I completely agree with that. And I think that part of figuring that out too, that people might miss is that whatever you're doing right now is also going to change. You switch jobs, you move houses, you have a kid, any number of like life things that happen is going to throw a wrench into your plan. So your perfect macros, your perfect, 6 meal a day, chicken and rice Tupperware diet, like that might not work for you at one day. And it's not because the diet doesn't work, it's just because it doesn't suit or fit into your lifestyle. And this is, I think, the part where people really mix things up, because it's like, hey, again, you're not a professional athlete. Like you are a, whatever job you do, and you're a person and you're a father and a husband or a wife or whoever. And you got to eat to support that, not because you're trying to step on stage. And if you're trying to step on stage, then, I mean, first of all, you're probably not listening to this podcast, but second, like completely different conversation.
Sorry. Yeah. But yeah, that's funny. But that's exactly it. Like if you can maintain it through all the changes in life, like, that's the, you always want to put your lifestyle first, and then you kind of adapt your diet accordingly and your training accordingly. But it just brings me back to whatever your goal is. Like if your goal, sometimes if you have a very specific, especially a bodybuilding goal, then going on the dark side is probably going to happen. If you have a very, but if your goal is just something to be healthy and to be strong and to look good, be kind of jacked and feel confident. All of these things can be had through just, that long figuring out the diet process and lots of intelligent progressive training. You can get all of that. And that can easily follow you into different stages of life. Whether it's, getting married and having children and getting a new job and traveling with work, all these things put huge pressures on, especially the diet. That's where the challenges are. And throwing drugs into the mix in that doesn't fix any of those things. Like if you have a hard time eating correctly and because you have a new baby in your house, or maybe your job has you out of town 2-3 days a week, throwing drugs into the mix doesn't all of a sudden just mitigate that. It just, you might look a little bit better, but it's certainly not, there's no,
at what cost?
Yeah. There's no magic. It's not solving your problem by any stretch.
Yeah. In some cases, it might even just make things worse overall in the long run.
Absolutely. Well, you don't want to be messing with your, it's not a good idea to be messing with when you got a little baby at home and especially if you're a new parent, it's stressful.
I remember when I was just starting at the gym, I walked into Popeye's supplement store like all 18-year-olds would have. Yeah. And you try and just want to buy some protein powder, and then the guy rinses you for $300 somehow on a bunch of supplements that you didn't need. Yeah. And it's like, okay, yeah, you need this carb powder and you need this and you need that. I'm like, yeah sure. Like I want to be jacked like you. And the guy was telling me, I never spoke to him again, never saw him again, but he was telling me like how he used to use steroids and used to compete, and he had to like take the pictures of himself off his phone because he couldn't look back on those because he always wanted to look like he did when he was on. But since he went off and he said like, oh, my mental health was ruined. Like I couldn't have sex, like everything like in my life he's like, I looked jacked. I looked awesome, but everything else in my life got worse. Cause like, I didn't know what I was doing and I did this worse. And now I had to like remove all that memory from my life just to so that I don't have to think about going on it again. And now I can just kind of train and be healthy. And that was like a very eye-opening conversation for me, like pretty young and early on. Not that I was ever really like, I wasn't thinking about it ever at the time. He was just randomly, had a day where he was just opening up to a stranger. But it was really eye-opening for me to hear that pretty early on.
Yeah, like you're very fortunate to have that conversation. And kudos to whoever that guy was for figuring that out for himself, or, I'm sure it cost him in a lot of different ways to reach that point. And, kudos to him for sharing it with a younger person. So, because that's huge. That's huge. And that's, that's the main reason I was getting, like the main reason people take steroids or they go on TRT, especially lately, TRT it was the hot topic. And they come up with all these, excuses or reasons, I shouldn't say reasons. Oh, I'm not performing in the bedroom, or, I'm not this, I'm not, or I'm just, I'm just not losing my lust for life. And all these things are legit indicators that maybe you need TRT. But at the end of the day, most people make these decisions because they want to be more jacked, and why do they want to be more jacked? Because they want to feel better about themselves. They want to, maybe be more attractive to women, or think they're more attractive to women. That's big cat.
But really just be more attractive to other gym dudes.
Fuck yeah. But really basically feel better about themselves.
Yeah.
And part of me is like, there's nothing really wrong with that. I mean, you only go around once in this rock, so you might as well feel good about yourself. But you run that risk then is that you feel good about yourself when you look a certain way. And that alone is kind of hard to give up. And now if you start to earn a living doing that, now that's even harder. Now it's kind of, if you gotta, and now if let's say you get a bunch of ego from that, like you get a bunch of your bros kind of, you're known as the big guy. Like there's no one more depressed than the guy who's known as the big guy, when he's off his cycle and he's off all his stuff. That's the most depressed guy in the gym. So that's, when I see young people wanting to go down that road, it's not that dark and depressing a road, but it certainly can be. And the more mature you are going down it, because there are plenty of guys who just get a little bit jacked, and they're just fine. They're just fine. But there's always people who just go down a very darker path.
Yeah. it's not necessarily the most dangerous road, but proceed with extreme caution. And I think probably more from like the mental health side of things rather than the physical side of things. Like you can figure out how to do it right physiologically, but navigating the mental side is a different beast.
Well, I think we can all. I mean, anyone who works in this industry will, and I'll be the first to admit, everyone in this industry who chooses to do this for a living, they probably got some kind of body dysmorphia. It's a pretty, might not be pronounced. They might have worked through it already, especially if they get to my age. Hopefully they've worked through it by then. But they probably got some type of body dysmorphia. So this industry already kind of attracts people with that kind of, they're not crazy about how they look. So I don't know where I was going with that, but
I think another thing, maybe just to highlight, and then we can kind of get off this topic, is
the somber topic.
None of it's somber, just that. But anyways, along with the body dysmorphia and the performance enhancing drugs, including TRT and whatnot, how many people are using these secretly, that they're promoting that, like, hey, look at, use my workout program, use my diet, like, look how jacked I am, so it'll work for you. But in the meanwhile, they're on, whatever else they're on. And I think that is the part that is the most unfair for consumers.
Yeah, I agree. And it's like, this industry has always kind of operated kind of like pro wrestling, it's, because everyone's, everyone, how do I put this? Like, everyone knows everyone's on, everyone, and so it's just like, you don't ask. It's kind of like, I don't know. It's gonna be
but us within the industry might know, but like regular consumers of fitness content have no idea. Like, oh my God, I didn't know that guy was on TRT, or that guy was on, whatever else he's using, and not talking about it. And that's the part I think that's sad.
Exactly. But like, there's a lot of people actually kind of assume that everyone knows. There's kind of this that's the excuse that I hear when I have conversations with people who are doing just that, putting out program, well, of course, everyone's on that kind of thing. But yeah, the average person probably doesn't believe that, or doesn't consider that. Now, I don't think it's quite as bad as it was like 10 years ago, that ignorance. I think a lot of people, in a lot of ways, it's gone an extreme the other way. People assume that to make any progress in the gym, you have to be taking something. So in a way, it's gotten way too much the other way. But there's always going to be that problem of the guy holding the tub of protein powder with the 24-inch arms, saying, "Oh, I've taken this. This is what made me look the way I do." That's been part of this industry since day one, since the advertisement with the guy kicking sand in the bully's face or whatever.
I hope that just regular, consumerism or consumer education has elevated to a level where that type of marketing no longer works, and people have got to get more real and a little bit more creative than like, hey, look at this super jack guy, and all he takes is protein powder and creatine. All of that, all he does, and he does 2 workouts a week. That's it. Probably not.
So but at the same time, I also don't want a 16-year-old kid look at it like. I've seen people online like thinking, oh, every movie star with a little bit of muscle, oh, well, I wonder what his steroid stack is. I'm like, geez, he's 160 pounds. Like, he did some push-ups and has some good lighting. I don't think he's, so it's kind of want to meet somewhere in the middle, I think.
Very fair. Like lighting and even the makeup and stuff that they can use in movies, like it can make a world of a difference. And when you actually understand how big someone is, like no one who's 160 pounds is on steroids. And if they are, like they're doing something very wrong.
Sir, woman.
Yeah, exactly. No, you mentioned we talked a little bit before about diet and kind of figuring out the diet.
Yeah.
And now how this changes over the years and through seasons of life and things that are happening. Yeah. What are some of the pillars in your personal diet? And of course, hopefully people can extrapolate this to themselves, but what are some of the pillars that have stuck in your personal diet and the way that you've navigated nutrition over the years?
Well, it's interesting when I coach people with on nutrition, I really focus on protein and I focus on total calories. And my line is saying carbs and fat, well, those can kind of shake down, however, as long as the protein's where it needs to be and the calories are. Now, it doesn't mean that carbs and fat don't matter. It just means like on this, as we're embarking, just focus on the calories and the protein, and we'll work, we'll dial in the other stuff later. And when I look back on my own kind of my own dieting history personally, from day one, I always would focus on protein, and that's never really changed. Certainly I've gone through times where I ate too much protein than I needed, and I certainly didn't get a benefit from that. But I don't think I've ever really gone through stretches where I ate low protein. So I do think there's benefit to that. And certainly calories, the times when, I got over myself and said, I really have to account for my calories. I can't just eyeball things that, when I actually would measure my food, or at least got really, really good at putting out my portions. Those are the times I've been in better shape. I've been leaner, so like those are the calories and the protein in my own life. That's always been things that I've focused on. And even when I've been trying all these cockamamie diets, whether it's super low carbs or super high carbs, calories and protein have always been the focus. And I think that's how it should be for everyone, just focusing on protein intake, and calories. And calories doesn't even have to be for the day. It can be like your average calories for the week. So in other words, you have a bad day, you eat way too much one day, and just eat a little bit less the next couple of days and kind of bring the net calories down so the averages. But of course, calories are very sneaky. You have to track them. You just kind of earn the right to eyeball things, I find. But if people just focus on those two things, then whatever kind of diet they do, whether it's, high carb, low fat, or low carb, high fat, as long as the calories, the protein where they need to be, they'll get results.
Yeah, and again, this is like the simple stuff that people don't. It's not cool. It's not cool enough to hear, but this is what works times all of the years.
Well, yeah, like now you throw in, okay, I mentioned high, carbs and fat, like those two extreme diets. Like, okay, we'll throw in fasting. Will it work? Well, if protein is where it needs to be, calories where it needs to be, it'll work. Okay, how about carnivore? Okay, well, if protein is where it needs to be and calories it needs to be, it'll work. Vegan, same thing. So that's it. That's the underlying bedrock of everything.
On the vegan note, because I know that he was a friend and mentor to you, but Charles Poliquin, I believe it was on Tim Ferriss's podcast. Oh, yeah. This was a number of years ago. There was like a Q&A. Do you know where I'm going with this?
No.
I'm pretty sure it was on Tim Ferriss's podcast. But anyways, there's like a little Q&A, and the question to Charles was, I weigh this much and I'm this big and I do this and I'm a vegan athlete, and like, what should I'm a vegan bodybuilder or something, and what would you recommend I change about my diet, or what should I do to gain more muscle, something like that. And in very much Charles fashion, his answer was, eat some fucking meat.
Yeah. I miss him, man. He was a nut. What was his line? He goes, "Yeah, vegetarian diets are very healthy. Just add meat to them." That's
a good one. I haven't heard that one from him. That's a good one.
He was a kind of misunderstood guy by his own, all due to his own problems. Like, because he was sometimes didn't have a filter. But for every really boneheaded thing he said, there was a couple of things he said that were very, 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 very smart. So.
And things that have stood the test of time and been ahead of his time. Like, another thing that he was saying was, if he had waited for the research, he would have been 3-4 Olympic cycles behind. And there's a lot of value in being in the gym and working with people, and like, hey, just kind of go in and fuck around and find out, is the saying that people say now, but like there's actual value in that. Yeah,
well, especially anything to do with training. Diet, he kind of went over his skis a little too often, but training, he knew his stuff, and because that's the way his mind was wired, is that he was just very, very observant and very, very analytical. And so, especially dealing with Olympic cycles, like or professional athletes, like he gets this athlete for a limited amount of time. He was just very, very good at figuring out, okay, where are they deficient? Okay. And developed all these testing norms for that. Okay, this is where they're deficient. Okay, how do I correct this as quickly as possible? And have it transfer to a benefit on, like, there's no point in getting a bang and bench press if you're a fucking figure skater. So it's like making sure this correction benefits the athlete. So that's where his skill set was, is he was very good at producing these, correcting these deficiencies that would translate onto the field of play. And I learned a lot from him doing that. And and I saw it in action, just how he could just, spot someone's flaw in their technique and what caused it. Like, it's easy to spot someone, oh, you have shitty technique. Okay, why?
Right.
And then correct it through exercise prescriptions. So,
and in the fastest way possible. And I think that some of the meticulousness of the way that he organized training and spoke about training and prescribed training, maybe is a better term, is I think part of some of where people criticize him now, because for an average person, a mother of two, and do they need to know exact tempos of all their exercise and have an exact all of these things? Like, maybe not, but like that wasn't who he was talking to. And so this is where the miscommunication comes in. Is like, if you're a pro athlete, you've got 8 weeks to prepare for competition. Yeah, you better be absolutely dialed in on your training, because this is your job. This is what you're trying to do. You're a mom of two trying to lose 15 pounds over the next 6 months. Like, okay, you can. We don't need to be as specific. It would be better if we were, but we don't need to be this specific.
Yeah, like everything he said this is where he kind of fell off. Like everything he said, there was always a lot of context that needed to be applied with it. And when something is in print, and if the context is included, the person just has to figure it out for themselves. So, But one thing I always loved about him is his form. When he's training athletes, he focused so much on really, really good form, like bringing it back to tempo, you said. And actually, I can see it a lot in like Mike Israel's stuff. Like, his form is so good and so clean and so precise. And that's such a benefit. Like, I don't see enough of that online today. Really good, clean form combined with like just working very, very hard, Often those two things. You can have great form, but not working very hard. You can have terrible form, but the person's busting their ass. It's when you marry the two, that's really kind of the magic happens.
A good buddy of mine who's not a fitness, he's not a trainer. He recently started training with another friend of mine who's a trainer who used to work with downtown. And I saw him. He's like, like, I'm not doing anything crazy. Like, it's just a split squat and a push up and like this exercise, or very simple stuff. But he's like, he has me doing it perfect form, like counting a 3-second tempo, like a 60-second rest is a 60-second rest. Yeah. And he's like, I feel amazing. Like, I'm getting such an amazing training effect, but I'm lifting like 30 pounds. Like, what is going on? I'm like, well, because for the first time in your life, like you're actually training. And this is what the value of having that in-person training is. Like, it's hard to replicate that online, because you can't really be like on it with the person and watching every single rep that they do and correcting in the moment. But there's extreme value in paying very close attention to your form and really dialing in the training whenever you're able to. Yeah.
And I know that's a hot point on social media right now. Is perfect form really important? And what is perfect form and all that? And admittedly, it is like, what's perfect form on my body? It might be different than on yours. And but certainly just Thibodeau always makes a great argument. It's like respecting that individual rep, the individual repetition, and when you strive to have a perfect rep, as he calls it, and perfect meaning like the tempo is deliberate, and it's like there's not a lot of momentum, and the concentric is a little bit explosive but not sloppy. I know range of motion is a debatable thing, but I'm a big believer in the fullest range of motion provided tissue is healthy. When you train like that way, it's just different, and you don't need a lot of volume then, and you don't need a lot of exercises, quite frankly. Like, that's the thing. Like, these really good trainers who get the most out of every repetition, you look at their programs and it's just like, man, there's only like 4 exercises here. Like, what the fuck? Like, where's the hot sauce? Like, what are we doing here? But then when you watch them put their athletes through it, or have them, better yet, have them put you through it, you're like, this is hard work. Like, the few times I squatted with Charles, I wanted to fucking die, because it's just like, you're so in the moment. Like, you're so just, your form is perfect, and you're being correct. He doesn't say a lot, but if you broke your form, he'd correct you, and just going to that, muscular failure.
Yeah, it's extremely valuable. I think again, everything is with context, right? So some people will say like, oh, it doesn't actually matter that much. And like when you say that much, like what does that mean? How much? How much does it matter? It would be better if you didn't do it, but we all totally get that like, hey, you're a regular person and like you've just got to train. But some people get too bogged down on the technique and forget to actually train hard, which that's like another problem. Like no one who's a technique monster is like, hey, don't train hard. That's not the right messaging. And you could even get away with like hard training is also a subjective thing.
Totally.
If I'm using less weight but getting the same intensity or the same effect on the muscle, then doesn't mean I trained less hard. It's just a different style of training. And I think this is again just where so much of the messaging is just mixed up and misunderstood.
Well, and I'm a big believer, especially when you go outside of the gym and you start looking at everything involved in the process of improving your body, everything is connected. Okay. And the obvious example of that is you can't out-train a terrible diet, and you can't, and at the same time, if you have a fantastic diet, but you don't train or you train very poorly, you're not going to have a very good result either. I mean, those are obvious examples, but everything is also connected. And if you approach your training like you don't half-ass it, and it's not random, and it is planned, and it's intelligent, and it's progressive. And every repetition, you're so in the fucking moment. Like, it's just like you're there, and you work as hard as you can. Like, if you're not going, like, basically maybe not all out every set, but as hard as you realistically can. There's a trickle down from that goes into the diet. Then like you're going to just over time, just approach food a little bit differently. You're not going to just haphazardly eat, I mean, obviously there are people that do, but I find that when people embrace something and they take it that seriously, it washes it to other areas. Like maybe that also they'll be getting to bed earlier, and they'll be more methodical with prepping their food, and they'll be more methodical with all these other things. It's like everything is connected and kind of snowballs.
I've started using this phrase return on effort, and people talk about return on investment of your time or your money or whatever, but I think in the gym we have to consider the return on your effort. If you're training 3-4 times a week and you go to the gym for an hour and you kind of putz around for an hour at like a 6 out of 10 intensity, you don't follow a program, you just do whatever machine is open at the time, and there's nothing open, I'll just do a set of curls, and you're still spending effort, but you're not really getting results from that. So in my mind, doesn't it make a lot more sense for regular people to invest a little bit more effort, train a little bit harder, follow a program, put more effort into your training? You're going to get an exponentially greater result. It's not that much. I'm not asking anyone to spend 2-3 hours in the gym every single day. Spend the same amount of time in the gym. Just work a little bit harder when you're there. You're going to get way greater results. And isn't that what everyone wants at the end of the day?
Well, yeah. And that's my biggest issue with reps in reserve is, it's just that, first of all, unless you've been training a very long time, and not only that, unless you've been training a very long time, and after you've trained a very long time, then gone on a course of training to all out failure. Now that order is important. Like if you don't have you need a long training history before you can really attempt to go to all out failure, because you have to develop the nervous system, and you have to develop the confidence, and the pain tolerance and maturity. So then you have this long period of training, and then you have this period where you go to absolute failure. Okay. And you push that boundary. Only then, once you've done these things, can you actually train reps in reserve, because now you understand. Okay. Now I understand what actual fucking failure looks like. Cause it's what and that's why I don't use those in my programs unless the person unless I know how the person trains and I know what their work ethic is like. So we're speaking the same language, because, it's people just don't work hard enough unless they know how to work hard and they know the value in it.
I totally agree. When you say a long period of training, for context for people, how long are we talking? It's not going to the gym for 6 months. How long are we talking?
Well, if we're talking years, because when you're new at this, you don't have to train that hard. Like you get gains. You just, some people, quite frankly, especially if you're young and you're healthy and you got plenty of time, you just have to do the pump and jump workouts, man. Do
anything.
Literally anything, and you'll get those bigger arms that everyone wants, and you'll get the The shoulders will start to come out, and you'll get those initial kind of newbie gains with with some ridiculous programming. You'll get them, and you don't even have to work that hard. And so, but the further you go down that line, the more that, everything else starts to matter. All of a sudden you have to work harder. You have to work a little bit smarter, and you have to learn to push your body out of its kind of comfort zone to get some adaptation. And that just takes time, and it takes practice. And, that's why you watch any kind of older seasoned lifter, they approach it almost like a job. Like, it's like they don't waste sets, and they certainly don't waste reps. Like, they're just, they've got their exercise, and they, do a couple warm-up sets, and then they do their work set. And it's like, it's almost like they only have so many dollars to spend. And so they're spending it as wise as they can. And like, that's and that just takes time to get there.
It takes a lot of time. I think that even for me, I don't fully understand reps in reserve for my own self for all exercises. And I think it also changes. Like, I've gone through a series of injuries last year. And so my strength is a little bit different, and things feel a little bit different. And so on certain exercises where I was like pretty dialed, it's like, now it's like, I'm not actually sure while I'm doing it. Like, I know where I'm going to fail, but like, to accurately calculate mid set while I'm going 2 reps in reserve, it's like, first of all, this is too much mental math. It's too inaccurate, and I don't see the payoff from this.
Well, yeah,
and if I can't do it, and not that I'm, the greatest, whatever, but like, I'm far more experienced than the average person out there. Like, I don't think that most average people can accurately do it.
Well, yeah. And the bigger the exercise, the more difficult it is to drill down. Like, yeah, if we're talking a bicep curl, you probably figure out reasonably where you fail and where your reps in reserve are. But if we're talking a back squat, man, you can always do one, or a leg press, especially. You can always do one more. You can always do one more. And, and if someone puts a gun to your head, you can probably do one more. Probably do one. So now, okay, so what exactly are these reps in reserve? Like, so what I think is my 1 rep in reserve, is it really like my 7 rep in reserve? Okay, like, but if I can only reach that level of effort when I got, a terrorist putting a gun in my head, like, is that even realistic? Like, it's just, now I get it. Like, it's just a way to get people to think about their effort. And so that's why I'm not shitting on the method, but it's just, there's a lot of kind of context that needs to go along with it.
I think something like that, for a lot of people, they'll try and implement it, and by no fault of their own, implement it poorly, or ineffectively, and therefore, like, they don't get the intended results from it, and then they kind of dismiss the whole concept of like, oh, this doesn't work.
Yeah,
it's like, well, it's not exactly true. It would work if you were able to do it right. It's just, the question is, are you able to do it right?
Yeah, exactly. So, there's still very much utility to it, but just there has to be a lot of education that goes along with it. Yeah.
Are there any mistakes that you've made in the last, 10, 20 years of training that if you could go back, you would totally change them for yourself? And to frame this question a little bit more, I think it's a tough question to ask. Like, hey, if you knew what you knew now, would you do things differently in the past? And the answer is almost always, of course, because like, you're more educated now.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, the mistakes you made helped you learn what you know now. So, barring that, like, what are some of the mistakes you made, and would you have changed them?
Well, I definitely would have. I would have trained like I have a bad shoulder from day one, as opposed to training how I did train, developing a bad shoulder, and now being forced to train like I have a bad shoulder. And how did I get a bad shoulder? It was just too much benching, going too low in my dips. I used to do very, very heavy dips, go way too low because I thought I was getting a maximal stretch on my tricep, but I was just getting a maximal stretch on my shoulder. So that would be the biggest thing, because that's something that haunts me today. I mean, I can't train the way I'd like to because I have that. It's not going nowhere. So that's definitely a regret that I'd like to, and I'd certainly be just as smart if I didn't have to endure this. So that and that kind of speaks to just an overall approach of just, I always use pretty good form. My form could always be better. And I always kind of respected my form, but I think I just did too much. I did too much volume and wore myself down a little bit. So to answer your question, I would have trained a little bit harder, a little bit less often, but not like low volume, and just been more kind of treating every work set like, okay, this means something. I don't have a million of these in a bank. I only have a limited number of these, and just, put more care and effort into everything. But I always trained reasonably intelligently, but that'd be the biggest thing, is just doing a little bit less and doing a little bit better and avoiding these things that hurt me today.
Would you have done like more prehab, quote unquote, kind of exercises for your shoulder or anything? Or you would have just like you would have removed the things that you think hurt your shoulder?
I would have, or
reduced, maybe is a better word than remove.
Really just done them better. Because the things that really hurt my shoulder were, again, the dips and doing, I love to incline bench. So maybe my, I would have stopped, because I was always I'm a full range of motion guy. So I was right to my chest. Had I stopped, maybe 6 inches above my chest, I'd probably have a much better shoulder today. Would I have missed out on any gargantuan pec development? Well, evidently no. So it's just like, I would have made that change as well. Just these little things that you're forced to do as you get older. If you start doing them from day one, when your tissue is perfectly healthy and you're a young person, it doesn't shortchange your gains. Like, it doesn't mean, I'm going to have less, it just means you'll be able to train longer for better. So I would have made those changes for sure.
Yeah. So I guess just more mindful of what you're doing and how it's affecting you. And I think it's a really tough thing for people to understand. I get it, even though I'm still relatively young, only because I've been injured so much in the past, where it's like, I know what my body feels like and what things are going to happen. But my peers and friends who are my age are like, no, I feel great. I'll just bench like 3 times a week. I'm like, sure, you could, but why? Like, are you gaining anything from that? And what's that going to do to you down the road?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, exactly. And then, but my biggest, training, I was always okay, but it was always diet. I definitely, I wish I'm my long rant about learning how to diet and figuring out the diet. Now I was basically speaking to myself. Like, had I figured that out in my 20s, allowed myself to get big, allowed myself to get, talking about dysmorphia earlier, I always looked at myself, I'm carrying too much fat. Now when I look at pictures from those days, I look like a fucking skinny club kid. Like, I wasn't carrying that much fat, So had I allowed myself to get big, get, a little sloppy in my 20s, at that age when it doesn't look, I'm 50 now. If I walk around bulky, I look ridiculous, whereas in your 20s, you look like a bouncer, you're still getting laid. So it's just, it's socially acceptable. So, allow myself to get higher in body weight, put on that mass when your body is young, and then slowly take off the body fat. And then you're left with this base of muscle that's there to stay. We were talking about drugs earlier. Nothing works better than adding muscle than a bulk in a young, healthy body. Big caveat there. Big caveat.
Yeah. Big caveat. And doing it properly. And again, I think a lot of people are afraid of gaining even a little bit of body fat. So they say they want to do a bulk, but they give it like 3 months and they gain, 1 pound. They're like, oh no, this is not good. It's like, well, you got to commit some time to this, and like you got to understand what the payoffs are. Like, you're going to add some body fat, but your point of what you're doing, why you're doing this, is to add muscle, and you're also doing that.
Well, yeah, and you can see this a lot in now that social media is so big and all these old bodybuilders are on social media now. And a lot of them are saying the same thing. It was that it was way easier to get big, back in their day, when it was 20, 30 years ago. And not because their genetics are any different, it's just, and there's not like they were any smarter back then. It's just, there was less incentive to have your shirt off all the time. These guys could actually have an off season.
Right.
Like they could actually, whatever the contest was, let's say it's the Olympia in October, they have their contest and then that's it. Maybe the next contest is March, the Arnold Classic, but most of them would just wait till the next Olympia. So this long period where they're covered up and they're not taking selfies every day and updating all their, they got a sweater on and they're lifting heavy weights and they're eating big and they're getting a little heavy. They're putting on all this tissue that you can't put on, eating right around maintenance, like that these sports try to do. Not to shit on anyone, but and I see this in my colleagues. I see guys who, frankly, they know better and they're always taking selfies and doing ab shots and which is fine, to each their own. And at the same time, they'll be lamenting about, I've always been undersized and I've always been, I'm like, well, don't you see the disparate perspectives here? Like at the one time you're lamenting being underweight and the second time you won't allow yourself to gain weight, so it's, yeah.
Yeah. I think that there's a ton of truth that I did like a pretty good bulk like a couple of years ago. I added like 30 pounds and definitely not all muscle. Like obviously like it was a pretty good one. And but I had to have a real conversation with myself going into it. Like, hey, I am not going to like the way that I look at the end of this, but to my own credit, I also had a longer outlook. Like that bulk was whatever, 6 or 8 months or whatever it was, but it's like, that's not the end. And I think this is maybe another good point to talk about is just thinking about timelines in training. I think younger people, we get stuck in thinking about real short time, like 3 months or 6 months, but we got to think about the rest of our life. Like, what do we think about the next 30 years? So, okay, I'm going to get a little fat for 8 months, but then I'm going to cut all that off and then I'll be good. And then, what's the next evolution from that? So I don't know if you have any maybe tips for just kind of trying to think about elongating your time frame or people's time frame about thinking about their training and nutrition.
Well, it's again, it all depends on the goal, but assuming someone's goal is they want to look like a bodybuilder or they want to look big and muscular, a muscular body. It's just, it is having a longer term goal, but it's also just like the worst thing you can do is change your program all the time, and because for like, that's just straight up like the changing your program every 4 weeks thing is the dumbest possible thing you can do from a muscle building perspective. I get it from a client retention perspective if you're a coach, because my client's getting bored, so I want to keep the business, so I'll send them a new program. Like you're doing them a disservice, but I get it. I've had those exact conversations,
Mm-hmm.
And it's just the worst thing, because you're just, after 4 weeks, you're kind of now at the point where you made the kind of neural adaptations. Like now you're actually, when you fail at an exercise and add reps, you're actually adding, you're into the muscle now, as I like to put it. Like you're into actually progressively overloading the muscle. It's not just this nervous system and coordination and all this shit.
It's not just skill acquisition anymore.
Exactly. Thank you. Yeah, you're more well-spoken than I am. But what do you do then? You change the program then. So just when it's getting good, man, it's just like, just when you're getting somewhere, you change shit up. And I get it. And I also get it from, it's easier if you're a coach who works like that. You just have everyone on here's your program it's back month. And then next month it's chest month. Yeah. I'm laughing at it, but it's just terrible programming. The best thing you can do, and this is my training program, and I'm going to just keep working it, get consistent, and that means getting out of this, I got to diet every year. I'm just going to treat it like I'm just going to get as best as I can for as long as I can. Getting out of this mindset, now I got to start dieting. Now I got to start gaining. Why don't you just get better and do this for fucking 5 years or 10 years or whatever? And, and getting slowly, that's how you get there. It's these, once you get really, really big and are really developed, then you can have these kind of little whiplashy things. Like an actual bodybuilder. Then you can actually do these things because you built the fucking house already. Now you can have now you can do these little renovations here and there. But that initial period when you're building the house, just thinking like 5 years, think long term.
I love that analogy. You've already built the house and now you can do renovations. That's a really good one. That's going to stick.
Well, okay. Like it's just, I don't know. And again, I did all these mistakes. I would diet every year. And like hard fucking diets. Like, man, like, for 3-4 months at, 1,800 calories and all this. And yeah, I'd lose the fat that I put on in my 3-month bulk, and just all you do, you extend that over for a decade and you've gained and lost the same 10 pounds over and over again. And everybody online who says, bulking doesn't work. You just gain and lose the same 10 pounds. Yeah, because you're fucking it up. Because you're not doing it right. It's like anything. If you do, it's like any endeavor. If you don't do it right, it's not going to work. It's not that whatever you happen to be doing is so wrong. anyway.
Yeah, and this is how the whole conversation comes full circle at this point, right? It's like everything can work, but everything is not going to work for you, for the individual. Like you've got to play guess and check and work with a coach and find out how to make this stuff fit your lifestyle, because that's what matters more than like who has the best approach. Exactly.
You gotta, with me with my coaching, the first thing I do is the first questions I ask people is number one is probably, what is your goal? But then after that, it's all about, tell me about your commute. Tell me about, how many kids you got? Oh, how old are they? Oh, that's a really busy age. What's, basically trying to figure out what's their rhythm in their life. And, because you get a handle on that, you understand the person, so you understand their goal and you understand what their life is like. So now you can kind of build a program that kind of can weave into that. And you can't just slam, okay, here's your 6 exercises. Here's your 6 workouts for the week. Make it happen, guy. Like you got to see, okay, well, how much time do I have to play with? Where can I have slightly longer workouts? Where can I, whatever, like you always have to put the person first, their lifestyle first.
If it was as easy as simply picking the quote unquote right training program and diet, then everybody would be 9% body fat and super jacked.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, I'm not saying it is a difficult process, but it's a much longer process. I mean, I think that's where us as an industry, we really sell this stuff short, is that we don't talk about how long it takes. Everyone's talk a lot about the effort required and all that, but we don't always talk about how long this takes. Especially building muscle, it takes forever.
And it's way hard. I think building muscle is way harder than losing fat.
Oh, way harder. way harder. Especially an appreciable amount of muscle. Like once you're, especially as you get older, forget about it. It's a long, difficult process, a rewarding one. But like fat loss is all mental. It's not fun, but it's It's a different kind of
simpler.
Yeah, simple, not easy. Yeah.
Well, hopefully after listening to this, people will have some appreciation for the length of time, that these things take and all of the things that go into it, and have some more considerations for themselves. But without, wanting to take up too much more of your time, Bryan, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about today or get off your chest before we close it off here?
No, I'm good. I enjoyed talking to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Bryan, where can people find you and get in contact? I'll put it in the show notes, but just rattle it off here for us.
Well, my website, I still have one of those, is bryankrahn.com, and that's BryanKrahn.com. And that's also my Instagram handle, and I'm there. I think I'm on Facebook too, but I'm not there too often. But yeah, you can find me that way.
Awesome. BryanKrahn.com, Bryan Krahn on the social media platforms. Bryan, any last message, fitness or otherwise, that you want to leave the people with here in closing?
No, I've already done enough rambling.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Bryan. I appreciate you. I appreciate everyone for listening. Thank you for your time and for your attention as always. Check out Bryan on his website and social media and all that stuff. Share the podcast with a friend, family, all that good stuff. And that's that. Go outside, be a good person. See you next time.